Let us assume for a second that a figure of authority ordered you to deliver a 400-volt electrical shock to another person. Would you comply? While most people would answer with a clear no, one of the most renowned psychological studies, the Milgram obedience experiment, just proved otherwise. During the 1960s, Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram conducts a series of psychological experiments that lead to some very shocking results. These results actually prove how powerful authority is to get people to comply with extraordinary demands. So what was this Miligram experiment? Stanley Milgram started his experiment in 1961. It was shortly after the trial of the World War II criminal Adolf Eichmann started. Eichmann's defense was that he was merely following instructions when he ordered the death of millions of Jews. This created interest for Miligram. In his 1974 book Obedience to Authority, Milgram posed the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? Was the question he asked. The participants in the most famous variations of Milgram experiment were 40 men recruited using newspaper ads. In exchange for their participation, each participant was paid $4.50. They only had to show up for the experiment to get paid and did not necessarily participate. Milgram developed a fake electrical shock generator with shock levels starting at 30 volts and increasing in 15-volt increments all the way up to 450 volts. The many switches were labeled with terms including slight shock, moderate shock, and danger, severe shock. The final two switches were labeled simply with the mysterious XXX. Each participant took the role of a teacher who would then deliver a shock to the student whenever an incorrect answer was given by him or her. While the participant acting as a teacher believed that he was delivering real shocks to the student was previously chosen actor in the experiment who was simply pretending to be shocked. As the experiment progressed, the participant would hear the student plead to be released or even complain about a heart condition. Once they reached 300-volt level, the student would bang on the wall and demand to be released. Beyond this point, the student, who are the actors, became completely silent and refused to answer any more questions. The experiment then instructed the participant to treat this silence as an incorrect response and even deliver further shocks. Most participants asked the experimenter whether they should continue. The experimenter issued a series of commands to prod the participants along. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. The measure of obedience was the level of shock that the participant was willing to deliver. How far do you think most participants were willing to go? Surprisingly, of the 40 participants in the study, 26 delivered the maximum shocks, while 14 stopped before reaching the highest levels. It is important to note that many of the subjects became extremely agitated, but they still continued to follow orders all the way along. This is whopping 65%, that is 2/3 of the participants continued to highest levels of 450 volts. All the participants continued to 300 volts. Milgram later surveyed the participants and found that 84% were glad to have participated, while only 1% regretted their involvement. So why did participants comply to such unreasonable and unethical demand in Milgram experiment? There are some situational factors. The first one is the physical presence of an authority figure. This dramatically increased their compliance. Second is the fact that Yale, which is considered to be a trusted and authoritative academic institution, sponsored the study, led many participants to believe that the experiment must be safe. Third, the selection of teacher and learner seemed random. Fourth, participants assumed that the experimenter was a competent expert. And fifth, that the shock were said to be painful but not dangerous. But quite apparently, these were dangerous experiments. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs without any particular hostility on their part can become extremely compliant if exposed to authority as an influencing technique. Moreover, even the destructive effects of the work became patently clear, and they were asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality. Relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority, Milgram explained in Obedience to Authority book. So what is the conclusion? Authority is a very powerful influencing tool. Before the Stanley Milgram experiment, experts thought that about 1 to 3% of the subject would not stop giving shocks. They thought that you would have to be pathological or psychopath to do so. Still, 65% never stopped giving shocks. None stopped when the learner said he had heart troubles. How could that be? We now believe that it has to do with our utmost innate behavior, that we should do as told, especially from an authority person. Further studies also determined that women are about the same obedient as man. Distance to the victim affects the obedience. Distance to the person ordering you affects the obedience, and also the appearance of the authority person and his rank increase or decrease the obedience. So the next time you blindly try to follow an authority figure, just remember Milgram experiment.